This is Chapter 6, Part 4. Let's continue talking about these non-undercover operations. Let's give the definition of a raid. The raid is an unexpected visit by police that uses the element of surprise to arrest drug offenders. This operation tends to target drug use and low-level drug dealing at both private residences and commercial establishments like clubs. Okay, that's what it's typically used. That's what we mean when we're talking about a raid. Targets for raids are often identified via multiple citizen complaints or calls for service related to criminal or disruptive behavior around a specific dwelling. So let's turn this into an example here. You've got some house, maybe your neighbor, who is showing a lot of signs that there's drug sales going on in and out of this house. You've witnessed some things. You've maybe witnessed parties. You witness a lot of disruptions, and maybe the police get called quite often by various neighbors to this place. So if you get enough of these calls and enough eyewitnesses that you can put together a case to get a warrant, then you could, if you could get that warrant, then you could conduct this raid. So this is often how it happens. The drug dealers are kind of sloppy. They're in a particular neighborhood where neighbors are seeing some things, and they're getting, maybe the police called on them frequently because they're kind of loud and not doing their illegal operations very quietly, very subtly. And so if you get mounting evidence, you get enough evidence, then you get a warrant. Multiple officers or agents participate in the raids, and the outcome is often publicized so as to deter other drug offenders. And of course, you're using multiple officers because there's safety in numbers. That you'll usually see law enforcement, if they're making an arrest, will get if there's any potential threat. A favorite thing to do is get several officers because there's strength in numbers. And if you have multiple people that you want to restrain and potentially arrest, well, you're going to have a lot easier job catching these people, holding on to these people, controlling this group if you've got a big group of officers yourself. If you're all alone and you go in to a situation with a group of individuals, it's dangerous, it's risky, and you're not going to be able, it's going to be very difficult to control all those people, right? So a raid is a search and seizure operation requiring a search warrant from a judge. Okay, so this is all on the up and up. This is not undercover sort of sneaky stuff. This is getting that warrant, and you're busting in to the place. It has the element of surprise, sure, but it's this is not undercover work. The limited evaluations that have been conducted on the effectiveness of raids on suspected drug-using establishments show short-term, significant, positive short-term effects on drug crimes and related criminal behavior. But these effects weaken over time, particularly in high crime areas. This is an interesting kind of finding that criminologists often find in their research, that when you have these sort of aggressive tactics used, like a raid, that it does tend to have some effectiveness, that it sends the message to drug dealers in the neighborhood, in the area, that there's things are cracking down here. The law enforcement is getting tough. We better go quiet, maybe slow down on our criminal operations, our drug operations, because there's a lot of heat going on right now. There's folks getting busted, and there's these raids. So it does tend to have an deterrent effect. But the problem with these sort of get tough, dramatic measures like this, like a raid, is that the effectiveness of that sort of fades over time. Gradually, people kind of forget. If you're not having these constant, frequent raids, then people sort of, that was dramatic at the time, but now it's been a few weeks, it's been a couple of months, things cool down, and then people go back to their old habits. And they find this with it's not just these raids. I've seen this with lots of different sorts of studies, that if you get tough through these kind of dramatic events, like say, for example, you set up a random stop someplace to check for people driving under the influence. You just set up a stop out on some random street, maybe close to where a lot of bars are. and you're just sort of searching everybody passing through this area, this spot on the street. That's like a kind of a crackdown, get tough. We're going to check everybody, see if there's drinking and driving. That sort of thing reduces drinking and driving according to the evidence. So there is some deterrent effect. The problem is it doesn't last forever. It's short term. It's a couple of months. So that's one downside of it, is that the deterrent effect doesn't last as long as people would like. Now, I'll use the term crackdown, but let's get specific about what we mean here. The crackdown is an operation where law enforcement abruptly escalates activity and presence in drug hotspot areas. So it's a little more of a general thing. A raid is a specific instance, but a crackdown is sort of a strategy that we're going to get tough. We're going to have this sudden escalation of law enforcement presence in hotspot areas, and there's going to be, it's a sort of aggressive, very proactive strategy. So they use this term crackdown, because we're going to get tough at least temporarily. May not be. Crackdown sort of implies that it's going to last, but maybe not last forever. But again, it's that suddenness, element of surprise, that dramatic effect that can have a deterrent effect. Police operations during a crackdown often involve a number of uniformed officers and undercover agents, both. They are highly visible to increase the actual and/or perceived threat of arrest. Again, it's kind of a deterrent strategy. It's like raising the actual or the perceived threat of getting that you're going to get caught, you're going to get arrested. And that's the way deterrence is supposed to work. That if the threat seems more real, more likely to happen, more immediate, more in your face, then that's supposed to convince people that breaking the law is not worth it, right? That's the logic of deterrence. Crackdowns tend to target both drug use and dealing of harder drugs like crack cocaine and heroin, as well as drug-related offenses such as property and violent crimes. So it's not just a targeting only trying to reduce drug crimes. It's a bigger basket than that, where it's trying to also reduce the number of crimes that tend to go along with the drug crimes, property crimes, violent crimes. So it's a bigger, broader strategy than just drugs. Studies conducted on the effectiveness of crackdowns at decreasing criminal activity show, like raids and other things that I've mentioned, or just this kind of general tendency, that there's a short-term impact on not only drug crimes but also other related criminal behavior. So these sorts of strategies seem to have seem to be somewhat effective. The problem is they don't last as long as people would like. Okay, now weed and seed initiatives, a multi-agency approach whereby law enforcement weed out drug, violent, and gang activity in high crime areas, and community organizations provide the community with prevention, treatment, and human service programs. So this is kind of you could call it like a carrot and stick sort of approach, where you come into these neighborhoods with these gang members, and you're basically, the message is, hey, we're here to help. We want to help you folks find jobs, maybe further your education. If you've got some drug or alcohol issues, get you some treatment, et cetera, all these positive sorts of programs. We're here to help. But particularly if we see violence, if we see drug-related violence, gun violence, often with these kind of programs, then we're going to come in with the stick, right? And we're going to come in aggressively, and we're going to in a very proactive, aggressive way, make arrests where we can, and just get tough. So it's sort of like it's a soft and a tough approach combined. It's like we can either give you this or we can give you this. Which way you want to go, the positive way or the negative way? It's kind of up to you. That's the attitude with these weed and seed initiatives. Now, drug diversion programs. An intervention, what this is, an intervention by law enforcement targeting low-level drug offenders, typically marijuana users. So the idea is, at that level where you find somebody maybe in possession of some marijuana, small amounts of marijuana indicating use, not sales, that you, at that point, this term diversion always means kind of steering people away from the criminal justice system. Let's not arrest you. Let's not take you downtown. Let's not book you. Let's not create a record for you that's going to cause you problems. Let's give you a break here at this point and divert you away from this harder approach of arrest and official processing by the criminal justice system. Law enforcement, what they do is they issue a warning rather than arresting these low-level offenders in order to divert these minor drug offenders away from the criminal justice system. So the philosophy behind all, whenever you see this term diversion, is, getting an arrest, a record of being arrested for a crime, being charged with a crime, being convicted of crimes. This can hurt a person's future, and there's a lot of cost to pulling people, social cost, economic cost, etc., into pulling people into the system and processing them within the criminal justice system. So the idea is if the person is sort of a minor offender, is not a serious case, well, maybe it would be better for the individual, for the community, for everyone, if we kind of take a lower intensity, a more positive approach as opposed to arrest and criminalization, right? Criminal processing. So that's kind of the philosophy behind diversion. Some of these programs have mandatory education components where offenders participate in brief interventions. So maybe we'll give you a warning, we won't arrest you for this marijuana possession, but we're going to go make you're required to take this class where, hopefully there's some, get you educated, get you sort of more fully aware of what you're doing here. And that if you don't do that, if you don't go complete this course or complete this little program, then maybe we're going to think about arresting you, kind of a thing. So work with us and we'll work with you. If you don't work with us, well, then maybe we're going to have to step it up and be a little more aggressive with arrest and process you through the criminal justice system, that kind of approach. This strategy aims at both to decrease pressure on the criminal justice system, jail overpopulation. That's a big problem in many places throughout the system. Too many people in jail, not enough room, and this overpopulation problem. And so if you're not arresting everybody, these minor offenders, that's going to help the pressures on the system, as well as prevent low-level drug offenders from dealing with the long-term impact of a criminal record. Criminal record makes a person's life more difficult, and it's harder to get a job, and it's not a good thing for that person's future. So that's some of the philosophy behind this diversionary approach. Most diversion programs for offenders occur at the pretrial stage of the criminal justice system. What is unique about law enforcement diversion initiatives is they occur even earlier in the criminal justice process, preventing arrests, bookings, etc. for criminal behavior. So it keeps everything off the books and keeps it unofficial. So that's a strong positive, at least for the individual, the defendant involved. Asset forfeiture. Now we're kind of finishing up the chapter here with this issue of taking away assets from drug offenders. Asset forfeiture is the process by which government seizes cash, cars, homes, and other property that it claims have been involved in or associated with criminal activity. Criminal forfeitures result after a conviction for a crime to which the forfeited property is related. Civil forfeitures are based upon the unlawful use of property, irrespective of its owner's culpability. So we're talking here about two different levels. Presumably you folks have all studied the difference between criminal and civil law. And so it's just two different levels. You have a higher standard of proof. If you've been charged with a crime, that's a higher standard of proof. You have to have evidence beyond reasonable doubt. With civil law, you just have to have more evidence, preponderance of evidence, meaning like 51% of the evidence is on one side versus 49% on the other side. So if it's 51% guilty, then you're considered, it's decided that you're responsible for that bad behavior, right? So, there are different systems, different laws with different thresholds of guilt. But you can see that both types of laws get used to take assets from people who've been accused or convicted of committing drug crimes. With civil forfeiture, the offender does not need to be convicted or even officially charged with a crime, since the contention is that the property itself is guilty, right? So, so drugs, illegal drugs, those are illegal just in and of themselves. So if we take those from you, even if you're not guilty of selling those, or even if they're not yours, well, it's the product is bad, right? So we can take it even without any sort of proof that you've committed a crime or done something wrong. So that makes it a controversial practice, um, in that you could say there's not due process here. You're not really going through a careful legal process to make sure that what you're doing is protecting everybody's rights fully, that sort of thing. So there is some controversy with that. A number of U.S. Supreme Court decisions in the 1990s confirmed the legitimacy of asset forfeiture as a tool in drug law enforcement and established guidelines to avoid abuses of the practice. Now, I'm keeping this really short. They've got several high-profile cases, Supreme Court cases you could take a look at in the chapter, study the details of those. But to me, most important is to get you a big picture. The Supreme Court has confirmed that this asset forfeiture used as a tool to fight, criminal drug activities is legitimate, is constitutionally sound, according to Supreme Court decisions, especially several of those made in the 1990s. So that's the big picture on this particular practice. And there we go. That, again, there's a lot. This chapter's got a lot. And so I've just had to kind of hit the summary points, the big points, but definitely go over those terms that I didn't take the time to go over those big cases that I didn't take the time to go over, and fill in, kind of focus on some of those little bit more detailed sections that I didn't have time to talk about.